Maybe if he hadn't followed his uncle to Mississippi, he could have still been alive. So young he was, his death was brutal, and his killer's acquittal, most of it all, shocked the world.
The death of Emmett Till is an important episode in the modern civil rights movement. When you talk to people of that era, particularly the students involved in the movement, they identified with Emmett Till because they were the same age as Emmett Till. So when they were 13 and 14, when Emmett Till was killed, they're 17, 18, and 19, in the 1960s. In terms of galvanizing the energies and in terms of motivation, they were motivated by that identification with Emmett Till.
The lynching of the tender teenager would galvanize the civil rights movement as activists dedicated themselves to ending the conditions that had led to his cruel death.
You could see how badly mutilated his body and his face was, how that disfigures him in a way that shocks this nation and shocks the sensitivity of a generation of activists that are going to have an important impact on the trajectory of the civil rights movement.
And the fact that it happened to a child makes all the difference in the world. This is the story of 14-year-old Emmett Till, a black teenager who was brutally and unjustly murdered, a clear indication of the sheer cruelty of whites in those dark eras. And for what reason exactly was he killed? For something so trivial, so insignificant. Stay glued to this channel as we embark on the journey to unravel the lost story of Emmett Till. But before we proceed, do not forget to support our efforts by hitting that like button before you. Share with your family and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening black narrative, and kindly subscribe to keep the channel growing. Your support means a lot to us. Now, let us dive in.
Truth and justice hold a specific weight in life today. In 1955, it was looked at as more of a privilege than a right. The death of 14-year-old Emmett Till shook the entire world with the sobering reality of discrimination, ultimately igniting the civil rights movement as we know it. Nearly 70 years later, social justice is still top of mind. The truth surrounding Emmett's death is highly relevant. We traveled to bring you a story I grew up hearing from those who witnessed what happened to Emmett, a story that is still impacting the lives of Hoosiers today. There is a lot of power in knowing and experiencing the living truth.
The gruesome murder of Emmett Till, a black teenager from Chicago, and the acquittal of the two white men who had killed him, was a catalyst for the civil rights movement. But almost as fast as Emmett's name would become known around the world, it had begun to fade. Now, how could people forget the torture of that 14-year-old boy? How could the world forget such a heart-wrenching case without proper justice being served? A food for thought, this is for all. Now on to the question, who was Emmett Till before his untimely end? Born in the month of July the 25th, 1941, in Argo, Illinois, a town outside of Chicago, Emmett Louis Till was an only child to a single mother and widow, Mamie Till, who had left Louis Till, Emmett's father, while the boy, Emmett, was yet an infant. In 1945, Mamie Till would receive word that Louis, Emmett's father, had been killed in Italy. Mamie and Emmett would spend some time in Detroit and move to Chicago when Emmett was around 10. She had remarried at this point, but would later on part ways with her husband when she learned of his infidelity. It would be quite an ordeal for any woman to go through Mamie Till's experience, but despite the emotional trauma all these may have caused, the woman never failed to supply her son all the attention required to be stable as a child well cared for. Mamie Till would describe her son, Emmett, as adventurous and independent-minded, even when he was a young child. An incident when Emmett was 11 also reveals his courage. Emmett's mom would recall how, on a certain day, her estranged husband came by the house and threatened her. Emmett had stood up to him, grabbing a butcher knife to defend his mother if necessary. She never did forget this. By his mother's account, Emmett was a responsible young man. As a preteen and teenager, he often took care of the house while his mother was at work. Mamie Till often called her son meticulous. He was proud of his appearance and figured out a way to steam his clothes on the radiator. But he also had time for fun. He loved music and enjoyed dancing. He had a strong group of friends back in Argo whom he would take the streetcar to see on the weekends. And like all kids, he dreamed of his future. Emmett told his mother once that he wanted to be a motorcycle policeman when he grew up. He told another relative he wanted to be a baseball player. But sadly, He never lived long enough to actualize his dreams, as just like a candle in the wind, his life was blown off at such an early age. Here's what went down. In 1955, Mamie Till-Bradley's uncle, 64-year-old Mose Wright, visited her and Emmett in Chicago during the summer and told him stories about living in the Mississippi Delta. Emmett wanted to see for himself. Wright planned to accompany Till with a cousin, Wheeler Parker. Another cousin, Curtis Jones, would join them soon after. Wright was a sharecropper and part-time minister who was often called preacher. He lived in Money, Mississippi, a small town in the Delta that consisted of 3 stores, a school, a post office, a cotton gin, and a few hundred residents, 8 miles north of Greenwood. Before Till departed for the Delta, his mother cautioned him that Chicago and Mississippi were 2 different worlds, and he should know how to behave in front of white people in the South. Till assured her that he understood. Although from 1882, the statistics of African Americans being lynched continued to be collected. Since that time, more than 500 African Americans have been killed by extrajudicial violence in Mississippi alone, and more than 3,000 across the South. Most of the incidents took place between 1876 and 1930. Though it was far less common by the mid-1950s, these racially motivated murders still occurred. Throughout the South, interracial relationships were prohibited as a means to maintain white supremacy. Even the suggestion of sexual contact between black men and white women carried severe penalties for black men. A resurgence of the enforcement of such Jim Crow laws was evident following World War II, when African American veterans started pressing for equal rights in the South. Racial tensions increased after the United States Supreme Court's 1954 decision in Brown versus Board of Education to end segregation in public education, which it ruled unconstitutional. Many segregationists believed the ruling would lead to interracial dating and marriage. Whites strongly resisted the court's ruling. One Virginia county closed all its public schools to prevent integration. Other jurisdictions simply ignored the ruling. In other ways, whites used stronger measures to keep blacks politically disenfranchised, which they had been since the turn of the century. Segregation in the South was used to constrain blacks forcefully from any semblance of social equality. Before Till arrived in Mississippi, 2 African American activists in Mississippi had been murdered. An NAACP field worker, the Reverend George Lee, was shot and killed at point-blank range while driving in his car after trying to vote in Belzoni. A few weeks later in Brookhaven, Lamar Smith was shot and killed in front of the county courthouse in broad daylight and before witnesses after casting his ballot. Both were active in black voter registration drives, but no one was arrested in connection with either murder. On August 19, 1955, the day before Till left his home in Chicago with his uncle and cousin for Mississippi, Mamie Till gave her son his late father's signet ring, engraved with the initials LT. The next day, she drove her son to the 63rd Street station in Chicago. They kissed goodbye, and Till boarded a southbound train headed for Mississippi. It was the last time they ever saw each other. Till arrived in Money, Mississippi on August 21, 1955. He stayed with his great-uncle Moses Wright, who is a sharecropper, and he spent his days helping with the cotton harvest. So, on August 24, 1955, Till and a group of teenagers would enter Bryant's grocery and meat market to buy refreshments after a long day picking cotton in the hot afternoon sun. What exactly transpired inside the grocery store that afternoon will never be known. But it was said that while standing with his cousins and some friends outside a country store in Money, Emmett had bragged that his girlfriend back home was white. Emmett's African-American companions, disbelieving him, would dare Emmett to ask the white woman sitting behind the store counter for a date. Later on, he went in, bought some candy, and on the way out was heard saying, "Bye, baby," to the woman. There were no witnesses in the store, but Carolyn Bryant, the woman behind the counter, later claimed that he grabbed her, made lewd advances, and wolf whistled at her as he sauntered out. In the early morning hours of August 28, Roy Bryant, the cashier's husband, and J.W. Milam, Bryant's half-brother, forced their way into Wright's home and abducted Emmett Till at gunpoint. Bryant and Milam would make Emmett carry a 75-pound cotton gin fan to the bank of the Tallahatchie River and order him to take off his clothes. There they would severely beat the boy, gouging out one of his eyes. They then took him to the banks of the river, where they killed him with a single gunshot to the head. and then the two men would throw the teen's body, tied to the cotton gin fan with barbed wire, into the river. Wright reported the kidnapping to the police, and Bryant and Milam were arrested the following day. On August 31, 1955, Till's corpse was discovered in the river. His face was unrecognizable as a result of the assault, and positive identification was possible only because Till was wearing a monogrammed ring that had belonged to his father. On September 2nd, less than 2 weeks after Till had embarked on his journey to the south, the train bearing his remains arrived in Chicago. Mamie Till kept her son's casket open, choosing to reveal to the tens of thousands who attended the funeral the brutality that had been visited on her son, and also allowing the world to see the brutal reality of racism and violence. The appalling images of Till's body in the casket appeared in the pages of Jet magazine and the Chicago Defender, and his murder became a rallying point for the civil rights movement. Moreover, the trial of Till's killers began on September 19, 1955, and from the witness stand, Wright identified the men who had kidnapped Till. After 4 days of testimony and a little more than an hour of deliberation, an all-white, all-male jury acquitted Bryant and Milam of all charges, sending a clear message that black lives were not valued in the eyes of the law. At the time, blacks and women were not allowed to serve as jurors in Mississippi, but even in the face of such injustice, Till's story did not fade into obscurity. Mamie Till dedicated the rest of her life promoting civil rights and trying to achieve some measure of justice for her son. Meanwhile, members of citizens' councils, that is, white supremacist civic organizations that used public policy and electoral power to reinforce Jim Crow laws, celebrated the acquittal, further threatening those who had testified against Bryant and Milam and members of the local National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. But rather than bending to the intimidation and psychic horror caused by the savage murder, Till's family, along with national newspapers and civil rights organizations, including the NAACP, used his death to strike a blow against racial injustice and terrorism. The photo of Till with his mother earlier that year, alongside Jet magazine's photo of his mutilated corpse, horrified the nation and became a catalyst for the burgeoning civil rights movement. 100 days after Till's murder, Rosa Parks, an African-American civil rights activist, refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a Montgomery City bus and was arrested for violating Alabama's bus segregation laws. Reverend Jesse Jackson told Vanity Fair in 1988 that Rosa said she thought about going to the back of the bus, but then she thought about Emmett Till and she couldn't do it. Protected against double jeopardy, Bryant and Milam struck a deal with Look magazine in 1956 to tell their story to journalist William Bradford Huey for between $3,600 and $4,000. The interview took place in the law firm of the attorneys who had defended Bryant and Milam. Huey did not ask the questions. Bryant and Milam's own attorneys did. Neither attorney had heard their clients' accounts of the murder before. According to Huey, the older Milam was more articulate and sure of himself than the younger Bryant. Milam admitted to shooting Till, and neither of them believed they were guilty or that they had done anything wrong. Furthermore, Till's murder increased fears in the local black community that they would be subjected to violence and the law would not protect them, according to Dolores Melton Gresham, whose father was killed a few months after Till.
At that time, they used to say that it's open season on Negroes. Kill them and get away with it.
After Bryant and Milam admitted to Huey that they had killed Till, the support base of the two men eroded in Mississippi. Many of their former friends and supporters, including those who had contributed to their defense funds, cut them off. Blacks boycotted their shops, which went bankrupt and closed, and banks refused to grant them loans to plant crops. After struggling to secure a loan and find someone who would rent to him, Milam managed to secure 217 acres and a $4,000 loan to plant cotton, but blacks refused to work for him. Milam was forced to pay whites higher wages. Eventually, Milam and Bryant relocated to Texas, but their infamy followed them. They continued to generate animosity from locals. In 1961, while in Texas, when Bryant recognized the license plate of a Tallahatchie County resident, he called out a greeting and identified himself. The resident, upon hearing the name, drove away without speaking to Bryant. After several years, they returned to Mississippi. Milam found work as a heavy equipment operator, but ill health forced him into retirement. Over the years, Milam was tried for offenses including assault and battery, writing bad checks, and using a stolen credit card. He died of spinal cancer on December 31, 1980, at the age of 61. Bryant, on the other hand, worked as a welder while in Texas until increasing blindness forced him to give up this employment. At some point, he and Carolyn divorced. He remarried in 1980. Bryant opened a store in Ruleville, Mississippi. He was convicted in 1984 and 1988 of food stamp fraud. In a 1985 interview, Bryant denied killing Till, despite having admitted to it in 1956, but said,
"If Emmett Till hadn't got out of line, it probably wouldn't have happened to him."
Fearing economic boycotts and retaliation, Bryant lived a private life and refused to be photographed or reveal the exact location of his store, explaining,
"This new generation is different, and I don't want to worry about a bullet some dark night."
Mamie Till later married Gene Mobley, became a teacher, and changed her surname to Till-Mobley. She also continued to educate people about her son's murder. In 1992, Till-Mobley had the opportunity to listen while Bryant was interviewed about his involvement in Till's murder. With Bryant unaware that Till-Mobley was listening, he asserted that Till had ruined his life, expressed no remorse, and said,
"Emmett Till is dead. I don't know why he can't just stay dead."
He later died of cancer on September 1st, 1994, at the age of 63. For African Americans, the murder of Till was evidence of the decades-old codes of violence exacted upon black men and women for breaking the rules of white supremacy in the Deep South, particularly for black males, who found themselves under constant threat of attack or death for sexual advances towards white women. Till's murder reverberated a need for immediate change. Carolyn Bryant testified in court that Till had grabbed her hand, and after she pulled away, he followed her behind the counter, clasped her waist, and using vulgar language, told her that he had been with white women before. At 82, some 60 years later, Carolyn Bryant confessed to Duke University professor Timothy B. Tyson that she had lied about the entire event. In 2004, the Federal Bureau of Investigation reopened the case. Although Bryant and Milam were long dead, agents sought to obtain a conclusive account of Till's final hours. The 3-year investigation, during which Till's body was exhumed for a complete autopsy, did not lead to the filing of criminal charges, but it did uncover a deathbed confession by Milam's brother Leslie, who admitted his own involvement in the kidnapping and murder. After the exhumation, Till's body was reburied in a new casket, and the original one was placed in storage at Burr Oak Cemetery in Alsip, Illinois, pending the creation of a planned memorial on the site. In 2009, a scandal involving the reselling of grave plots led police to investigate the cemetery, and they discovered Till's original casket, rusting and abandoned in a work shed on the outskirts of the property. Later that year, the casket was donated to the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. In conclusion, the story of Emmett Till is a tragic reminder of the deep-rooted racism and injustice that has plagued our society for centuries. His brutal murder at the hands of white supremacists in 1955 shocked the nation and galvanized the civil rights movement. However, despite the widespread attention and outrage that his case received, justice was never fully served. Sadly, this clearly shows the ongoing struggle for justice and equality in America, and it indeed reminds us that we must continue to confront and fight against the systems of oppression that allow such atrocities to occur. It is also a reminder that we must never forget the lives that have been lost to racism and violence, and we must continue to fight for a more just and equitable society for all. We come to the end of this video segment. Support our works by hitting that like button in front of you, share with your families and friends to keep spreading our eye-opening Black narrative, and kindly subscribe to help in building the rising membership of this channel. Your support means a great deal to us. Thank you for watching.